All right, guys, welcome back for day 2 of 40 Days to Purpose. I am so excited for today. There is so much to unpack in chapter 2. So if you have not yet read chapter 2, then you are going to be in for a treat for sure. But I definitely recommend that if this is your first time jumping in to this, that you read the chapter ahead of time. It is a really good way to be able to kind of see, what is God speaking to you through the chapter, and then take an opportunity to unpack it when we do these lives. Okay, so if you missed yesterday, if you're watching on my personal page, you can also go to Network for the Kingdom and on the Facebook group, and all of the replays will be pinned to Network for the Kingdom. So you can just go right into the featured section and you should be able to watch all of them. All right. So we are here for day 2. Now, before we jump in, I did want to just let you all know, for those of you who are just now jumping in, that we are doing 40 Days to Purpose. We're reading through the book of Exodus every day. We're reading one chapter of Exodus, and we're seeing, what is it that God has to say for our lives? What are the things that He's really speaking to us as we get ready to transition into the second half of the year. So reflecting on, what we've accomplished so far in the first half of the year, what are the shifts and changes that need to be made to have an awesome second half of the year? So we do this every year, right, leading up to June, as we're getting ready to transition halfway through the year. So one thing I do want to share with you, if you have not yet signed up, please make sure to grab your ticket to the Rise and Shine Summit. It is a wonderful opportunity to be able to be connected just with some amazing Kingdom people. Right now, tickets are free. If you can join us in Carmel, New York, we want to be able to see you. There's going to be some prizes, there's giveaways. You're going to get some awesome merch. You want to be a part of this event. I know God is going to show up powerfully, and it is the year to rise and shine and to step into everything that God has for us. We're going to be highlighting all of these different authors. Some of them have solo books books, some are in collaborative books, but all things kingdom based and kingdom focused. So if you've not yet signed up, you want to go ahead and click that link and sign up. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. As we are seeking this 40 days to purpose, we are on day 2, and chapter 2 talks about the birth of Moses, but not just the birth of Moses. It talks about his birth and then some key events that happened that led him into a place that probably he didn't expect to go. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to go through it as quickly as I can, because this could definitely, you could probably write an entire book just on chapter 2. But let's go ahead. And when you first start off reading this chapter, right away we learned that Moses was from the house of Levi, which is super interesting because Levi is the house of Levi is where you would get the priests, right? This concept, Levitical priests. So this is where you would get the priesthood. And then later on, for those of you who've read Exodus before, or you're familiar with Moses's brother Aaron, right? He was a priest. So it was because in order to be that, you had to be in the line of Levi. And so both Moses and Aaron were obviously from that line because they were brothers. So that's interesting. And then what we learn is that his mother, whose name is Yocheved, I'm gonna try to pronounce this. Yocheved. She conceives, and it says that she conceived and bare a son. And when she saw that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. So if you didn't get to read chapter 1 with us, chapter 1 talked about how at the end, a decree went out from the Pharaoh to kill all of the children that were it doesn't say this detail, but this is what scholars believe, about 2 years old and under, because we see this later on with Jesus around his time as well. But all of the Hebrew boys, the young boys, and this was an attempt to stop the lineage from moving forward. So Moses was one who was saved from this, right? So when his mother realized that she conceived, she did not abide by that. We learned that the midwives did not abide by the law that had gone out. And so she hid him for 3 months. So she hid him up until the point that she could no longer hide him. And it says that when she couldn't, she put him in an ark of bulrushes, and it says daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. This is so interesting because already God is answering. When we end this chapter, you're going to see that the people of Israel, the Hebrews, they were praying for deliverance. They were already in bondage. God already saw what was happening, and God already moved to answer their prayers, but it didn't happen right away. And what's interesting is when she put him into this the word here is used, and this is the King James, they use the word ark, but that it was covered. It was something that was hidden, and then it was placed in the river's bank. So this answer that God had in this case was hidden. So the answer for this was something that was not yet revealed, but it was something that was hidden. And it says, and his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. So we see that although the sister's not with him, this is his sister Miriam, although the sister is not with him right there, she was watching the whole time, right? And so even though he was hidden in this ark, he was placed in the river, the Nile River, and then we see the sister watching from afar, making sure everything is okay, maybe not directly interacting with the events, but she was afar off watching. And then it says that by this point, the daughter of the Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. So she saw that there was something coming, and she's like, what is this? Go get this thing. And when she opened it up, she saw that he was, it says the babe wept, and she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. So she was aware of the law, and she had an opportunity right there to either, comply with I would say with her father's law, or she could have gone against it. In this case, she did not comply with it, and it says she had compassion, and she actually called for a Hebrew woman to come and nurse the child. So what's interesting about this, and I don't know if you guys knew this, but when I learned this was so cool. was that when it says, when the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go, and the maid went and called the child's mother. This is so incredible. So sometimes God will ask you to give something up, and it might be hidden for a season. It might be something that you're like, "Oh, I have to let this go for a season." But look how good God is, because God had the right person be there at the right time. It was Pharaoh's daughter who was there, who had compassion when she saw Moses, knowing that he was Hebrew, and went and said, go find this child's mother. So the mother, although separated for a short time, was reunited with her child and had the opportunity to then breastfeed him for 24 months until he was about 2 years old. That is amazing. So that means Moses got to have that bonding with his mother early on. And that is so, I just thought that was so beautiful of a detail, that thinking about that mom who had to let go of something that would have been really hard to let go of. Like, what is it God has called you in your life that you have to let go of, that's really difficult to do, but knowing that it was within God's will and plan to reunite the two, and she still got to nurse her child despite what was going on around her, right? That the intervention came. And so, and then it said, and Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. So not only did she get to nurse her child, but she got paid to do it. I think that that is amazing. Not only did she get to be a mom, not only did she get to bond with her child in that early time, but she also got a reward for her obedience. God used the Pharaoh's daughter to then bless her with wages. That's so mind-blowing when you think about it. She got paid to do what she would have already been doing, had the laws been different at that time. It says, verse 10, and the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, because I drew him out of the water. And I love this because we see in the Bible, God constantly uses people. He will constantly use people that may not be, Hebrew or Israelite, or in our modern sense, might not be a Christian. And God can use anybody that he wants to further his plans and purposes in your life. And we have to trust that. And we see this as the case here. It says Pharaoh's daughter took him on as a son, but listen to how prophetic this is. She is the one who gave him the name Moses. And Moses means, do you guys know what Moses means? It means to pull out, to draw out, right? Being drawn out of the water. And this is prophetic because we know what happens at the Red Sea, that God draws Egypt. He's drawing them out of Egypt and drawing his people through the water. We see this later in the New Testament with baptism, right? We see that we are drawn out and birthed out of the water. So there's so many amazing parallels that can be made to this. But I really love this because it really shows full circle that God is in control of all things. Like, you don't have to worry about anything. God is in that situation. God is there. God is with them. And God is working and active, even in what would seem like your oppressor. Like in this case, that the Egyptians would have been the oppressors of the Hebrews at the time. But we see these details of God moving. Verse 11 goes on to talk about how Moses, it's almost like having sort of this sort of identity crisis, right? We see a lot of time pass from the time that he's being nursed by his mother until he becomes a grown adult. And it says, it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown. Now, when you read literature, okay, you have to understand that the Bible also does follow certain literature parallels. There's things that we can take away from it and understand when reading it with that lens. That between verse 10 and verse 11, a lot of time has passed. And sometimes we can skip over that lack of detail and not really fully understand, well, what is this person, Moses, right? He went from, think about, you're a baby up until being a pretty much a grown adult. Now, there's a lot of time that passed in between there. He had a life. He grew up knowing and understanding all of the ways of Egypt. He grew up under Egyptian rule, right? Now, I don't know for sure if he knew that he was Hebrew, right? So we see that even early on in his early childhood, that the sister was just nearby. We know that the mom was involved and she was able to be a nurse to him and to be a maidservant. So we don't know if he had that relationship, if he was aware of it, if it was a big family secret, if he didn't know. I mean, the text doesn't really say, but what we can say is that he was very well aware of the ways of Egypt, okay? And he was of someone who would have had a high position and rank. Then it says that he went out into his brethren and looked on their burdens and spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Now, already inside, you can see this demand for justice. He started to see that he says he went out and he saw that his brethren were being afflicted. He was looking on their burdens. But now, on the outset, Moses would have appeared as an Egyptian, but in his heart, he was a Hebrew. I need you guys to get that. Sometimes we'll be in situations or things where on the outset things look one way, but it's not actually what it is. And why do I know this? I know this because when Moses took the opportunity to intervene, it was not well received by the other Hebrews. So it says he looked his way in that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So this is Moses taking things into his own hands, taking justice into his own hands, not having the refined character yet that is needed in order to lead. How many of us feel called to leadership but don't want to go through the process of what it takes to become that leader? You know, God, there's a lot of people who skip process. And if you skip process, you're going to end up not being in the long, like not maintaining for the long term the breakthrough, right? The thing that God has called you to, if you do not allow yourself to go through the character work, which we're going to see that God is going to put him on that path in a moment. But and all of this is before he even had that encounter with God in the burning bush. But we see that it says he went out the second day. Behold, two men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him, "That did the wrong. Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow?" So, like, why are you doing this? Why are you hurting your fellow brother? And he said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" And Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." So he wasn't respected yet. How many of you have felt a call to leadership and you feel like, man, nobody recognizes me, nobody knows like what I'm able to do, I know I have this calling, and you're trying to do things in your flesh and you're trying to do things on your own, you're going to see that this is going to be the answer that you're going to get. There is a process that you need to go through which your character is developed, or else you're going to handle things in that sort of overabundance, right? That zeal, that I'm just going to handle it like this, and not doing it the way that God wants you to handle it. And so that's why process, submitting to leadership, submitting to mentorship, having somebody you're accountable to is so important. And I see this all the time. And this is, listen, I don't want anyone to take this wrongly. I had this experience myself, but when you believe that your call is greater than having to submit under authority, then you're in error. You're in error. Okay. You have to be able to submit to an authority that is going to help train and develop and mold you. And that doesn't necessarily mean leaving where you've been called to be because of correction. We have to be open and willing to be corrected for God to take us to those higher levels, to trust us with more, to be effective leaders. It doesn't mean that your call doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that you're any less called or you're any less gifted. It just means that we have to learn these things so we can be effective and in a sustainable way. And this is true for your life. This is true for your business. This is true for your leadership, for wherever God has called you. But the other thing I want to say is people may not recognize you because you might not be operating in the way that God needs you to operate, right? God always has his way of wanting to do things, his way of how we should go about things. But if we're not operating according to that, we're not going to be effective for those around us. Verse 15, now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by the well. So sometimes when you start this process, you feel this call, this tugging, maybe you're doing things in your flesh. God is going to pull you out of that situation. He's going to call you to go into a different situation, into a new place, to learn a process of development. And we see this as the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw their water. So this is where we're seeing that he's going to learn what it means to care for the sheep. This is what it means to become a shepherd, to become somebody who is watching over the people, somebody who is serving. I mean, in your business, if your business is not designed with the mindset of serving others, you're not going to be successful in anything that you do. You're not going to be successful in your business or whatever it is you're trying to do, because it has to be based in service. It has to be based in what is going to be the best for that person that's connecting with me. This is why I say I meet with people all the time, and they all go, some of them go with us, some of them don't. Some of them go different routes, and that's okay, right? They're entitled to that. But I do know what other things are out there. And so I'd say, you know what, even if you and I don't work together, I want you to know this is what you can expect. Here's the pros, here's the cons, make the best decision for you. But being honest and open and transparent is my way of being able to serve you, whether or not you and I ever do business together. Okay, that is going to build a character in you that will become part of how people see you and how they know you. And that's so important. And Moses didn't have that yet. Moses had to go through this process where he was there, and it says he stood up and helped them, and he watered their flock. So he's watering the flock, feeding the sheep. He's helping. This protector is coming forward to protect the daughters, the 7 daughters. And so you see this process of service and of development. I'm going to tell just a really quick story, and we're almost actually at the end of chapter 2. But when I had first come back, not first come back, before I received the position of leadership that I have now in my church, one of the things that I shared with my pastor, and this was something that God put on my heart, and he was very adamant about this. And he said, Daniela, I do not want you to accept any position of leadership until you learn how to serve my people, and serve my people doing something that you don't believe you're called to do. And I was like, wait, what does that mean? That sounds crazy. I've never heard of that before. And God convicted me, and he said, and he told me that he wanted me to literally clean the church, but not specifically just the church. He said, I want you to clean the bathrooms. And I'm like, clean the bathrooms? You want me to do what? And God said, you will not accept any position of leadership until you learn the humility of what it means to serve. And I told my pastor, and this is a true story, you can ask him to this day. And I said to him, I said, please, I said, you need to allow me to do this. And I was pregnant with my daughter at the time. And I said, here I am with this little baby bump. I got a mask on, so I'm not ingesting any chemicals, and I'm cleaning and I'm scrubbing the toilets. And I did it. And I'm in this position and place of being surrendered to the Lord, where if God says, hey, I'm going to need you to do that again, even though you're the director of discipleship ministry, I need you to go and clean those toilets, that I'm going to say yes and amen. That is the position of leadership that we have to come to, that we have to be willing to be a part of, in order that we're in the will of God, in order that we're humble and we're surrendered. Because had Moses not gone through this process, right, he probably would have done a lot more in his flesh besides striking the rock, right, which you read about in later in the Bible. So there are things that we need to do, because as you progress in leadership, as you progress in your calling and in your purpose, there are going to be different levels of trials, different levels of testing that's going to require more faith. It's going to require more obedience. And all of these things don't come overnight. It's like it's like a marathon, right? You have to be surrendered to that, and knowing that though the more is going to come, and it's not always going to be how we want it to look. And so we need to be aware of that. But then we see, so all of this happens, he comes in, and then it says he takes a bride, and this is where Moses meets Zipporah, who becomes his wife. And then we learn that he had a son, and his son was named Gershom, and I believe Gershom, Did I look up the meaning? Oh, I don't think I looked up the meaning. Oh, it says, and I have been called, sorry, I have been a stranger in a strange land. So that's where the name comes from. A lot of these names have significant meanings. It's very interesting to look up, especially if you were to, like, let's say, read it in the Hebrew, because they would already understand that that's what it means. So when you look up the meanings, it gives a new layer to what we can extract from the text. But so this is what we see. So he comes to this point of, we left Moses as a baby, now he's married. Right, he has a child, and by the end of it, it says it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died. Now we're going to see a change in leadership. But we talked about the importance of legacy. We talked about the importance of lineage. And so does that mean that this next Pharaoh is going to be like, oh, great, like, let's just let them go? No, that this person is going to have learned under the previous Pharaoh. But we see a shift again in generation, in changes, that this one passed away, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. So we see that they're crying out for salvation, but God had already moved to answer their prayer years before, when Moses was drawn out of the water as a baby. So God already moved to answer their prayer before those cries came up the way that they did, for the level of slavery and bondage and bitterness that they were under at that time. Verse 24, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob, and God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. So we're ending chapter 2, okay, understanding that God has already seen, God has already moved to answer. Now it's just a matter of the fullness of the events taking place in time to see what would happen next, to see the deliverance and the salvation of the people. So that was chapter 2. I hope that you got something out of it. I see that the chat is super quiet. I always love to hear from you, to know if you're receiving anything from this. I'm sure that you are. You're just absorbing it all. Please, if you can, go live and Network for the Kingdom in our group. If you're not part of that group, you can literally just on Facebook search Network for the Kingdom. We're the first one that pops up. And I want you guys to go live. I want to hear from you. I want to know what you received out of this. What did you get when you read chapter 2 on your own? Join us for that. And we will be back here again tomorrow with chapter 3. We're going to go live again. We're going to talk about chapter 3. And we're continuing to press into the Lord for the next 40 days in this transition, during this kind of trial period, going into the second half of the year, and knowing that there are going to be blessings that come out of this, come out of your obedience to do this. And join us again, for this next 40 days of purpose. Okay. And again, I'm just going to wrap up by saying, if you have not signed up, please sign up for the Rise and Shine Summit. We're going to have a great time. You're going to have more teachings like this, even more so, not just from me, but from all the experts that you're seeing on here that have really just been pressing into the Lord for what God has for you in the second half of this year. So that's June 21st and 22nd in Carmel, New York. Make the trip out to see us. This is going to be an event like no other. We're going to have worship. We're going to have a time of praying. We're going to have a time of learning and growing together. And I know that this is going to change lives. Our intercession team is praying for you. We're fasting for you. We're doing all the things to really ensure that we're doing our part in our prayer lives, to make sure that God really looks on this event and smiles on it, and we can glorify him in it. So thank you guys. If you know someone else who needs to hear what we just unpacked here in chapter 2, share them this video, tag them below, spread this. I think it's going to just be very impactful. So thank you, and we will see you back here again tomorrow.